He didn't just leave her. He publicly tried to wipe her existence clean. At the Starlight Gala, Julian Vance raised a crystal glass, his face radiating triumphant arrogance, and gestured to the woman beside him. He declared his new fiancée Aria was flawless and a perfect 10, a magnificent upgrade from his flawed prototype of an ex-wife. As Isabella Rossi stood frozen, feeling the hundreds of pitying eyes, Julian never glanced down into the shadows. He never imagined that the woman he was so determined to discard had just quietly, secretly accepted a partnership with a man who could buy Julian's entire world and not bother to file the receipt. The air in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel hung heavy, thick with the scent of expensive perfume, old money, and the suffocating perfume of status anxiety. It was the annual Metropolitan Art Fundraiser, a night where Manhattan's elite gathered to perform their philanthropy. For Isabella Rossi, it felt like an obligation to an old life she was still physically detaching from. 18 months had passed since the divorce papers were signed, yet in these polished circles she was still defined by the man who had discarded her. Isabella, the curator, the owner of the small, respected Rossi Contemporaries Gallery in Chelsea, felt her identity thin out and dissolve into Julian Vance's ex-wife the moment she stepped onto the marble floor. She was wearing a simple, tailored navy dress, a conscious rejection of the glittering, competitive gowns around her. She was speaking quietly with Mr. Harrington, a stern-faced collector, about the importance of supporting emerging digital artists, when the room's ambient hum suddenly choked off. A spotlight, intrusive and sharp, cut through the soft ambient light, finding the stage. Julian. Isabella felt a cold dread, not of sadness, but of inevitability. Julian lived for spectacle. A last-minute donation, likely well into 6 figures, had bought him this moment. "Good evening, everyone," Julian Vance's voice boomed, amplified and sickeningly smooth. He radiated success, a predator in a midnight blue tuxedo. "I just wanted to hijack this evening for a quick moment to talk about value." Isabella gripped her champagne flute, the delicate stem cold and wet against her palm. She knew this speech. This was the voice he used when he was about to restructure an uncomfortable reality. "As many of you know, the last 2 years have been about transition," he continued, gesturing for Aria Sterling to join him. Aria, a woman a decade younger than Isabella, glided onto the stage in a shimmering silver gown, her spun gold hair catching the light. She was undeniably beautiful, a masterpiece of modern cosmetic and digital calibration, the kind of woman who was always, consciously, being photographed. Julian wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close, the gesture less loving and more possessive. But transition is about seeking optimization, finding better returns. I discovered what it means to be with someone who truly inspires, someone whose presence is an asset, not a liability. Every word was a perfectly polished stone dropped onto Isabella's glass facade. She remembered all the times Julian had called her his secret weapon, the intellectual muscle he deployed in boardrooms. She remembered proofreading his dissertation, spending her own savings to keep her gallery afloat while his career soared. Julian looked directly across the ballroom, his gaze locking onto Isabella's. There was a brief, ugly flash of smug satisfaction in his eyes. "When you're aiming for the top," Julian announced, his voice rising in volume and arrogance, "you need a partner who looks the part, someone who shines, someone who is truly, perfectly, flawless." As he spoke the final word, the stage light shifted, catching the enormous rectangular canary yellow diamond on Aria's left hand. It exploded in a blinding flash of fire, a loud, vulgar statement of wealth that seemed to demand attention. It was the visual climax of his performance. The crowd erupted in applause, but Isabella could sense the discomfort, the quick darting glances between her and the stage. She felt the shame hot on her neck, but the core of her was cold, silent. She would not cry. She would not flinch. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her champagne, tasting ash and iron. Julian raised his glass. To my magnificent fiancée, Arya, thank you for showing me what a perfect 10 really looks like, to a future as bright and flawless as you are. Isabella put the glass down on a passing tray, her movement precise and controlled. The applause was deafening. She turned her back on the stage, every eye in the room pinned to her retreating figure. She focused on the cold, beautiful marble of the hallway, the only sound, the steady, dignified click, click, click of her heels. She walked out of the ballroom and into the biting New York air, knowing she had escaped the immediate firing squad, but sensing that the battle for her narrative was far from over. The night air, thick with rain and the smell of hot pretzels, hit Isabella like a shock of cold water. She stood outside the plaza, letting the biting November air scour the feeling of Julian's cruel performance from her skin. She pulled her simple wool coat tighter. She felt fragile, but not broken, like a cracked artifact that, with careful handling, could still be restored. Inside the waiting car, Hector, the kind driver she'd used for years, glanced back, his face a roadmap of concern. He didn't speak, which Isabella appreciated more than any comforting word. Hector had driven her to countless events, and he had driven her to her divorce lawyer. He knew the cost of every smile Julian had ever demanded. As the car moved uptown toward her brownstone, Isabella stared out at the glittering landscape of Midtown. The lights of the towers, monuments to men like Julian, seemed to mock her. Julian hadn't just insulted her. He had retroactively invalidated their entire 12 years. He had taken her dedication, her intellectual support, her very essence, and rebranded it as a failure to meet aesthetic standards. Flawless. The word was a parasitic whisper in her mind. When she finally reached her home on the Upper West Side, the silence of the brownstone was a blessed, tangible embrace. The space was completely hers, comfortable, filled with the challenging, often messy work of the artists she championed, stacked high with books and records. Julian had always called it cluttered and unoptimized. To Isabella, it was a sanctuary of substance. She collapsed onto the velvet sofa in the living room, the adrenaline finally leaving her limbs. Her phone vibrated. A text from Lena, her best friend. "I'm in a cab, bringing scotch and a tire iron. Where does he park?" Isabella chuckled, a dry, fragile sound. "Don't bother. Let's do lunch tomorrow. I have something better than arson to tell you." Her gaze drifted to the mantelpiece. Tucked behind a heavy bronze bookend was a small framed photograph, the one she cherished but always kept shielded from view. She picked it up. It wasn't a posed shot. It was a candid moment captured a month ago in a small, dusty bookstore in Milan. Isabella was laughing, head thrown back, an expression of complete, unself-conscious joy. The man sitting across from her wasn't smiling for the camera, but looking at her with an intensity that felt like a quiet promise. Damien Blackwood. The name was rarely printed in the society pages. He was a force of nature in the world of global tech and finance, the architect of a decentralized software empire that spanned continents, but he was a ghost in high society. He valued silence, privacy, and most importantly, meaning. They had met at her gallery 6 months prior. He'd wandered in on a slow Monday, wearing a simple black t-shirt, drenched from the rain. He didn't look at the prices, he looked at the work. They spoke for 2 hours about a challenging piece of kinetic sculpture, debating the artist's use of negative space and existential philosophy. He didn't know who Julian Vance was, and for the first time in over a decade, Isabella didn't feel like a supporting character in a man's life. She was just Isabella. Their relationship had been nurtured in a parallel world, far from the blinding lights of Julian's orbit. It was built on intellect, shared values, and mutual respect. He never once commented on her hair, her clothes, or her laugh lines. He called her small scar above her eyebrow, a souvenir from a childhood bike crash. The most beautiful signature I've ever seen. He hadn't been at the gala because he was closing a monumental deal in Singapore, one that involved securing infrastructure contracts with 3 world governments, a deal that made Julian's investment banking plays look like children's games. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a FaceTime call. It was him. She took a deep breath, composed her face, and answered. There she is. Damien's voice was a low, warm rumble that instantly began to soothe her raw nerves. I saw the wire reports this morning. The Peacock Parade sounds like it went exactly as predicted. But why are you wearing your shield, Izzy? She hesitated. Then the dam broke, not with tears, but with a flat, tired recitation of Julian's venom. The toast, the arrogance, the canary diamond, the word flawless. Damien listened, his expression shifting from concerned empathy to a silent, granite fury. When she finished, the silence was heavy, charged with unspent power. Micro cliffhanger. What is his reaction? Damien's expression remained dangerously still. He was thousands of miles away, yet Isabella felt his presence acutely, a quiet, anchoring force in the chaotic wake of Julian's malice. That man is not a lion, Izzy, Damien finally said, his voice dangerously low, stripped of all warmth. He is a yapping dog on a very expensive leash, and he is insecure, deeply, profoundly insecure. He has no idea how cheap that performance made him look to anyone with true power. He paused. Then his eyes softened, focusing entirely on her face. But none of that matters. What matters is that he made you feel small. He tried to define your worth by the standards of a fashion magazine. Isabella felt a stinging behind her eyes but held back the tears. He makes me feel like I wasted so much time, like I should have seen the superficiality sooner. Never, Damien said fiercely. You built a beautiful life. You just happened to share a decade of it with someone who valued surfaces. That time was not wasted. It was the education that allowed you to recognize substance when it finally showed up. He shifted the camera on his desk. Next to his laptop, bathed in the soft, clinical light of the hotel room, was a small, ancient-looking black velvet box. Isabella's breath hitched in her throat. I had this planned for Paris next month, he confessed, a rare vulnerability crossing his features. In the courtyard of your favorite museum, the one where you told me you first understood Bernini. He picked up the box. But I think we can both agree. The sooner we officially close that old toxic chapter, the better. He opened the box. Inside, nestled on dark silk, lay a ring that took her breath away. It was utterly unlike the gaudy, ostentatious yellow stone Julian had flashed. This was a sapphire, cut in a classic, elegant emerald shape, the color of a twilight sky just after the sun has vanished. It was deep, silent, and ancient. It was flanked by two small, perfectly matched diamonds that merely served to frame the sapphire's profound depth. This stone, Damien said, his voice reverent, is rare. It was sourced ethically from a forgotten mine in Sri Lanka. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It has history, it has integrity. He held the box up, the light catching the blue-black depths of the stone. Isabella Rossi, you are the most brilliant, resilient, and truly beautiful woman I have ever known. You are not an accessory to be polished for a stage. You are the entire irreplaceable collection. Will you marry me? Tears finally flowed, but they were hot, cleansing tears of unexpected, overwhelming joy. The cold shard of ice Julian had left in her chest melted away, replaced by a radiant warmth. Yes, she breathed, a laugh bubbling up through the tears. Damien, yes, of course, yes. Good, he said, the slow, brilliant smile that reached his eyes finally returning. He closed the box, the click sounding like a seal being set on their future. Now, he continued, his tone shifting back to the quiet, focused power of the Blackwood Empire. We have an engagement to celebrate, and a very public lesson in value to deliver to your ex-husband. Isabella wiped her eyes, feeling a thrill of righteous justice mixed with love. What are you thinking? Damien leaned into the camera, his eyes suddenly sharp and full of strategic intent. I was just doing some due diligence on a logistics company I own called Innovate Dynamics. It seems Julian Vance is trying very hard to buy it, using money that coincidentally I also happen to control. Micro cliffhanger. Damien is Julian's unknown obstacle. Julian Vance was riding an intoxicating, arrogant high. The morning after the gala, his office on the 55th floor of the Midtown Tower felt like a legitimate throne room. He had successfully orchestrated a public execution of his former life, and the reactions were pouring in. His phone buzzed constantly, texts from rivals praising his guts, calls from investors impressed by his ruthless efficiency. He was trending on social media. Aria, draped dramatically over his Italian leather sofa, was already giving interviews to society blogs about their power brand. "You were brilliant, darling," she cooed, scrolling through her boosted follower count. "Everyone is talking about us. You showed them what a real upgrade looks like." "It's about the narrative, Aria," Julian corrected, sipping his bespoke espresso. "It's about controlling the perception of value. Isabella was fine for the early stages, but this stage, the global stage, requires perfection, flawlessness." He felt utterly invincible. His focus for the day was his career-defining play. The hostile takeover of Innovate Dynamics, a multi-billion-dollar AI logistics firm whose reclusive founder was notoriously hard to reach. This deal would vault Julian from a top-tier player into the League of Legends, the league that people like Damian Blackwood inhabited. He had secured a final, aggressive round of funding from the European Investor Consortium, EIC, a shadowy but powerful group of Swiss and German private equity firms. The money was locked down, the paperwork ready, and the offer was structured to be financially irresistible. He was set to make his final, non-negotiable bid this afternoon. Julian sat back, swiveling his chair to look out over the expanse of Manhattan. He was a master of the universe. He even sent a final smug text to Marcus Thorne, a mutual acquaintance, knowing it would be forwarded to Isabella. "Tell Isabella the market has spoken. Some things are simply worth more than others." But around 11 a.m. the first crack appeared in the facade. His direct line rang. It was Mr. von Essen, the primary contact for the EIC, a man usually effusive and obsequious. Today he sounded tight, like piano wire. "Mr. Vance," von Essen began, skipping the pleasantries, "we have received an internal directive, the finalization of the capital transfer. It will be delayed, indefinitely." Julian stiffened. "Delayed? On what grounds?" "The deal is time-sensitive. The contract is signed." "We are invoking the reputational risk clause," von Essen said, his voice flat. "It's boilerplate, but the board this morning felt a certain need for caution. Market optics, personal judgment, it all factors in." "Market optics?" Julian scoffed. "My optics have never been better. I am trending." "The principal owner of our firm," von Essen continued, sounding almost apologetic, "is particular. He believes that discretion and integrity are paramount in high-value transactions. Loud displays, public feuds, they suggest instability. He values substance over noise." Julian slammed his fist on the desk. "This is absurd. Are you suggesting my toast at a charity gala is impacting a $10 billion acquisition?" "I am simply relaying the directive, Mr. Vance," von Essen replied, the line going silent. Julian ended the call with a curt, furious dismissal. He was enraged, but not yet worried. This was a negotiating tactic, a way to drive up the price. They were posturing. But the confidence that had defined his morning had been replaced by a raw, burning irritation. He was used to controlling the narrative, but suddenly the narrative was controlling him. He buzzed his assistant. "Get the CEO of Innovate Dynamics on the line. Now, tell him the offer is still coming, and make it clear we will not tolerate petty games." Micro cliffhanger. His money source is drying up. Julian spent the next 3 days in a state of escalating frustration, a captive in his own luxurious office. The calls and emails to Innovate Dynamics went unanswered. The CEO was traveling. The board was in special session. It was a complete, silent blockade. The flow of capital from the EIC had indeed stopped. The official excuse was pending a deeper review of macro market instability, but Julian knew it was a lie. The whispers on Wall Street, initially congratulatory, had soured into a vicious murmur. Thorne is unstable. He lost his touch. The deal is dead. Julian was used to being the puppet master, but now he felt the cold, hard strings of an unknown, unseen puppeteer tightening around him. He was losing control. In his paranoia, he turned his full corporate investigation team, plus a highly paid private investigator named Zev, onto the Ethelred founder. Zev, an ex-CIA agent, was notoriously expensive and effective. "I don't care about the shell companies, Zev," Julian hissed into the phone. "I want the ultimate beneficiary. I want the ghost at the top of the food chain. Find out who is trying to blacklist me." For days, Zev came up empty. The corporate ownership structure of Innovate Dynamics was a masterpiece of legal opacity, buried under layers of global holding companies, trusts, and blind entities. "This is unprecedented, Vance," Zev reported. "Whoever set this up, they value privacy more than oxygen." Julian's relationship with Arya began to fray under the tension. The penthouse, once a monument to their success, became a claustrophobic cage. "Why are you pacing, Robert?" Arya demanded one evening, scrolling through her phone. "It's exhausting. You're ruining the vibe." "The vibe, Arya," Julian roared. "The biggest deal of my life, the one that guarantees your life of private jets and endless shopping, is being systematically sabotaged by an invisible enemy, and you're worried about the vibe." "Well, maybe you just weren't as good as you thought you were," she said, her eyes fixed on her screen. "Winners don't get blacklisted." Her petulant comment struck a raw nerve, cutting through his armor. He seized the phone from her hand and threw it across the marble floor. It shattered with a satisfying, high-pitched crack. Later that night, Zev finally called. His voice was gravelly, tired, and deeply impressed. "I got it, Vance," Zev said, skipping the pleasantries. "It took everything, and it required breaking about 5 different international financial codes, but I have the name at the absolute top of the structure." Julian gripped the phone, his knuckles white. "Who is it? Give me the name." "The ultimate beneficiary of Innovate Dynamics," Zev stated, the name dropping like a lead weight, "is Damien Blackwood." The name hit Julian with the force of a physical punch. Damien Blackwood, the reclusive tech legend, the man who owned 3 satellites and whose net worth was estimated to be north of 50 billion. The man who was rarely seen, never photographed, and who operated in a sphere Julian could only dream of. Why? They had no history. They had never crossed paths. Why would a financial titan of that magnitude waste his time on a mid-level banker? Julian hung up, the answer an agonizing, maddening void. He had a name for his tormentor, but the motive remained an absolute, terrifying mystery. He looked out over the glittering city, feeling small and utterly exposed. He had no idea that the answer to his why was sleeping peacefully, her head resting on a pillow just a few miles uptown. Micro cliffhanger. The motive remains a mystery to Julian. The revelation that Damien Blackwood was his unseen enemy did not bring Julian comfort. It brought terror. Blackwood wasn't a rival. He was a catastrophe. Julian spent the next week in a feverish, desperate scramble trying to find the connection. He scoured the Blackwood file, looking for any link, any slight, any shared history, a board seat, a charity, a shared mistress. Nothing. Blackwood's life was a fortress of privacy. Julian's deal was irretrievably dead. The EIC had formally withdrawn their offer. Thorne Capital was bleeding investors who were terrified of getting caught in Blackwood's crosshairs. Julian was being suffocated, and he had no idea why. It was on a miserable, rainy Thursday morning, a day that perfectly mirrored the acid sludge in Julian's stomach, that the final devastating blow landed. His assistant, Sarah, A young woman he'd been treating like a footstool for weeks placed a glossy magazine on his desk with visibly trembling hands. "Mr. Vance," she whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe, "I think you need to see this." Julian glanced at the cover of Prestige, the city's most influential luxury lifestyle publication. He froze. The cover was an absolute masterpiece of understated, genuine elegance. It was a photograph of two people, not in a studio, but in a sun-drenched private gallery space. The man was Damien Blackwood, unmistakably, powerfully present, yet subtly framed. He had his arm around the woman and he was looking at her, not at the camera, with an expression of quiet adoration. The woman was Isabella. She was radiant, her face alight with a serene, unforced happiness Julian had never seen her possess during their entire marriage. Her dark hair was loose, and she was wearing a simple, tailored velvet suit. Her hand rested on Blackwood's chest, and on her finger the magnificent twilight blue sapphire ring seemed to absorb all the light around it, radiating depth and quiet power. The headline, in bold, sophisticated font, read, "Silent Power, Damien Blackwood and Isabella Rossi on Love, Art, and the New Definition of Success." Julian snatched the magazine, his hands shaking so violently the paper rattled. He flipped to the feature story, his eyes frantically scanning the pages. It was a stunning 10-page spread. Photos of them walking hand in hand through Florence, sitting intimately in the library of what was clearly Blackwood's sprawling upstate estate, and, most damningly, side by side in Isabella's Chelsea gallery. The text spoke of their shared intellectual passion, Blackwood's commitment to funding art education for underserved youth, Isabella's lifelong dream, and her resilience and authenticity after a difficult divorce. The narrative was clear. She wasn't a victim. She was a phoenix who had flown higher than ever. Then Julian found the quote, the one that felt like a surgical incision straight to his ego. The journalist had asked Damien Blackwood what he loved most about Isabella. In a world full of people shouting to be noticed, Blackwood was quoted as saying, "Isabella is a person of profound substance. She doesn't need to be the center of attention because she is her own center. She is an original, not a copy. She is, in every way that truly matters, flawless." Flawless. His word, the weapon he had deployed to destroy her in public, was now being used by the world's most powerful man to elevate her, to redefine the word as something internal, intellectual, and permanent. The context clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Innovate Dynamics, the EIC, the blacklist. It was never business. It was personal. Blackwood hadn't attacked a rival banker. He had protected the woman he loved from the petty cruelty of her ex-husband. Julian let out a raw, strangled sound, a broken laugh mixed with a defeated sob. He had thought he was playing chess, but he hadn't even been in the room. He had thought he was delivering the killing blow at the gala, but he had simply announced his own immediate financial execution. The door creaked open. Arya stood there, holding her own copy of Prestige, her face pale, the shock draining the professional glamour from her eyes. "Julian," she whispered, her voice trembling, is this real?" Julian looked at her, at the stunning, shallow symbol of his ambition, and saw not a trophy, but a liability, a marker of his catastrophic lack of judgment. "Yes," he said, his voice hollow, "it's real." Micro cliffhanger. Arya's allegiance is shifting rapidly. The next 48 hours were a blur of professional devastation and personal collapse for Julian Vance. The Prestige cover story was not a gentle decline. It was an avalanche of karma. Julian's phone, which had been ominously silent on the banking side, now began to melt down with calls from media and, more damagingly, from his remaining terrified investors. He was no longer the brilliant, ruthless titan. He was the villainous fool in Isabella's magnificent new narrative. His image, his brand, built over 2 decades, was shattered, replaced by the humiliating caricature of the arrogant ex-husband, the man who valued a cheap, loud surface over the profound substance of the woman who stood beside a legend. He retreated to the penthouse, drawing the heavy silk blinds against the accusing city light. But the real cold came from within the apartment. Arya was packing, not a weekend bag, but a row of enormous Louis Vuitton trunks, their empty jaws hungry for her expensive life. The transactional nature of their relationship, once a mutual agreement, was now brutally exposed by the market's verdict. "You have to fix this," she demanded, her voice high and brittle, devoid of the cooing affection she usually reserved for him. "The comments under my last post are brutal. I'm being called a gold digger and a tacky accessory. Your failure is ruining my brand." "Fix it? How am I supposed to fix it, Arya?" Julian snarled, pacing the vast, cold expanse of the living room. "The man is Damien Blackwood. He could buy and sell me 1,000 times over just to wipe his feed. He controls the capital that fuels Wall Street. Do you understand the level of power we are dealing with?" "I signed up for a winner, Julian," she snapped, throwing a cashmere sweater into a trunk. "I stood on that stage and looked like a magnificent fool while you were humiliating your ex-wife, all because you promised me power and status. Now, your name is toxic. You're a liability, and I cut my losses." The phrase, "I cut my losses," spoken with such cool, dismissive finality, echoed the very business ruthlessness Julian himself had always preached. He was being liquidated by his own principles. "You're just leaving?" he asked, a wave of incredulous rage and self-pity washing over him. "After everything?" "There was no everything, Julian," Arya said, not even looking up as she snapped a suitcase shut. "There was a contract. It's been breached. I'm simply terminating the agreement." She walked toward the marble counter by the door, picked up the huge, rectangular canary diamond, the symbol of Julian's fatal miscalculation, and held it between her thumb and forefinger. She dropped it. It skittered across the polished marble floor with an obscenely loud, lonely clatter. "Symbolic object, the returned diamond. You can have this back," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "It's starting to look tacky, and you'll probably need the collateral." She didn't look back. Her heels clicked a quick, angry rhythm on the marble. The door closed softly behind her, leaving Julian completely alone in the echoing, silent emptiness of his gilded cage. Fueled by a toxic combination of rage, whiskey, and the sudden, terrifying solitude, Julian made his final, irrational decision. He had to see Isabella. He had to force her to acknowledge the wreckage she and Blackwood had made. He needed to hear her admit the revenge was sweet. He grabbed his keys and stumbled out of the penthouse, driven by a desperate, consuming need for confrontation. Micro cliffhanger, the enraged final confrontation. Julian drove downtown in a haze of scotch and adrenaline, parking illegally outside Isabella's Chelsea gallery. He burst through the heavy glass doors into the cool, silent space. The gallery was filled with light and challenging, beautiful artwork, a stark, immediate contrast to the blinding chaos raging inside him. He found Isabella in the main exhibition hall, calmly discussing a new, massive, kinetic sculpture with a young technician. She looked tranquil, grounded, and utterly beautiful in a simple charcoal grey dress. She wore the sapphire ring, the twilight blue stone a quiet, profound counterpoint to the emptiness of his own finger. She turned at the sound of his heavy, uncontrolled footsteps. Her face was calm, unsurprised. She dismissed the technician with a gentle nod, never taking her eyes off Julian. "Julian," she said, her voice low and even, "you should not be here." "Shouldn't I?" He stalked toward her, his voice hoarse, laced with fury. "You did this! You and him! This was your revenge plot, my deal, my investors, my life. You planned it all, a meticulous little scheme to ruin me for the sake of your pathetic ego." Isabella looked at him, not with fear or anger, but with a profound, weary pity that ignited his final, sputtering rage. "You give me far too much credit, Julian," she said, stepping back slightly, her posture unyielding, "and yourself far too little. I didn't have to lift a finger to ruin you." "Don't lie," he spat, his face inches from hers. "That article, the quote, flawless. He used my own word against me. That was a dagger you put in his hand." "The only thing I am guilty of," Isabella said, her voice remaining level and strong, "is choosing to love a good man who sees me for who I am. The rest, Julian, was all you, your own architecture." She took a step closer, reversing the distance, forcing him to hold her gaze. For the first time, he saw her as a person separate from him, not the accommodating wife, but a woman with immutable, quiet power. He instinctively retreated a step. "You were the one," she continued, her voice gaining strength, "who stood on a stage and defined a person's worth by their surface appearance. You were the one so intoxicated by your own reflection that you ignored every single red flag. You never bothered to research the ownership of a $10 billion company because you assumed the world revolved around your brand." "Sebastian didn't attack you, Julian," she said, delivering the final surgical cut. "He just held up a mirror and you shattered it. He didn't have to ruin you. He just had to disqualify you from a game you never understood." "Your toast at the gala wasn't a shot at me," Isabella concluded softly, the cruelty draining away, leaving only the clinical truth. "It was a public confession of your own deep-seated insecurity and superficiality. In the world of real power and substance, that is a fatal flaw. You weren't defeated in a hostile takeover. You self-destructed. The truth landed with the dull, heavy force of a physical blow. The liquor and the rage couldn't shield him. The fire in his chest died out, leaving a vast, hollow emptiness. He looked around the gallery at the beautiful, challenging art, and at the woman he had so casually and cruelly discarded. He had traded gold for glitter, and the glitter was now dust. He started, the single word collapsing in his throat. What was there left to say? He had lost. Not to Isabella, but to the small, petty, transactional man he had become. "You should go, Julian," Isabella said, turning her back on him completely, her focus returning to the kinetic sculpture. The movement was final. His part in her life was finished. Micro cliffhanger, the true cost of hubris. The implosion of Julian Vance was spectacular and swift. Within weeks of the prestige article, Thorn Capital was in shambles. Investors fled, creditors moved in, and the entire edifice of his ambition crumbled. The firm was liquidated in a fire sale, the losses gargantuan. The spectacular penthouse was quickly sold at a massive discount, a chilling testament to his loss of face. Julian Vance was no longer a name whispered in boardrooms. He was a cautionary tale, a social pariah, and a financial ghost. For Isabella and Damien, life settled into a rhythm of quiet, profound joy, the antithesis of the toxic noise Julian had thrived on. Their wedding, 6 months later, was the final, definitive rejection of Julian's world. They did not marry in a grand hotel ballroom. They married on a sun-drenched terrace in Positano, overlooking the glittering Tyrrhenian Sea. There were no press, no society photographers, just 20 of their closest friends and family, including Lena, who served as Isabella's maid of honor. Isabella wore a simple, breathtakingly elegant gown by an Italian designer she had helped launch years ago. She carried a small bouquet of olive branches, a symbol of peace and endurance, and fragrant white peonies. Damien, in a tailored linen suit, looked at her as if she were the only person in the universe. Their vows were not about assets or mergers. They were about shared values, mutual respect, and the promise of a partnership built on truth and quiet reverence. The only photos taken were by a family friend, capturing moments of genuine laughter and stolen kisses, not posed tableau for a magazine. Their life together became a seamless blending of their deepest passions. The Isabella Rossi Art Education Fund, backed entirely by Blackwood Holdings, was launched, dedicated to creating state-of-the-art creative centers in public schools across the country. It was a mission born from Isabella's intellect and heart, finally given the funding and scope it deserved. One crisp autumn afternoon, they visited the first completed center in the Bronx. They walked through a sunlit room filled with children painting, sculpting, and composing music on new equipment. A young girl with paint-smeared cheeks proudly showed Isabella her vibrant canvas, a chaotic, challenging, beautiful mess of color. In that moment, watching the spark of creativity ignite in a child's eyes, Isabella felt a sense of accomplishment more profound than any social triumph, any gallery sale, or any diamond. She was Isabella Rossi, philanthropist, curator, and co-architect of a meaningful legacy. She was no longer defined by the men in her life. She was defined by the value she created for the world. She looked at Damien, who was quietly watching the children, a rare, genuine smile on his face. He caught her eye and nodded, a silent acknowledgement of their shared purpose. This was the final resolution, the quiet victory of substance over superficiality. Julian had been obsessed with the fleeting image of success. Isabella had chosen the enduring strength of meaning. They were standing on the terrace of their new home, a stunning modern house of wood and glass built discreetly into the landscape overlooking the Hudson River. It was a home designed to facilitate connection and quiet reflection, not to announce arrival. The twilight sky was a swirl of purple and orange, a masterpiece no artist could fully replicate. Damien came up behind Isabella, wrapping his arms around her waist as she looked out at the water. "What are you thinking about, my love?" he asked softly, resting his chin on her shoulder. Isabella was quiet for a long moment, watching the distant lights begin to twinkle on the opposite shore. "I was thinking about that night," she whispered. "The gala. I felt so erased. I truly thought a part of me, for 12 years, had accepted his definition of value. I believed my worth was tied to his approval, his success. And now?" he prompted gently. Isabella turned in his arms to face him, her own eyes clear and bright, reflecting the depth of the sapphire on her finger. She reached up and touched the faint scar above her eyebrow, the one he called her signature. "Now I know that my value was never his to define. It was always mine to own," she said. "My time with him wasn't a waste. It was the long, difficult education that taught me the difference between glitter and gold, between noise and substance. His cruelty was the final gift. It broke the last chain and set me free. It led me here." Damien leaned in, his eyes full of that familiar, unguarded affection. "He was a fool, Isabella. A man dying of thirst while standing in a river because he was too obsessed with his own reflection to see the living water all around him. He never saw you." He kissed her, a kiss that was neither dramatic nor possessive, but a testament to the quiet, unshakable world they had built together. It was a life of purpose, partnership, and profound, authentic love. They had won, not by defeating an enemy, but by simply choosing to build a better life. A life where true value was found in the light they created for others, not the light they chased for themselves. The last trace of the sun vanished, and the first star appeared, hanging like a quiet, hopeful sapphire over the dark river. Julian Vance saw value in surfaces. Isabella Rossi found it in substance. His ambition was a glass house that shattered. Her resilience was a foundation of stone. This story is a powerful reminder that the only person who gets to define your worth is you. If Isabella's journey resonated with you and you believe in the power of karma, please hit the like button and let us know your favorite part in the comments below. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a reminder that the best revenge is simply a life well lived. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell for more stories of justice, drama, and ultimate triumph.